today's podcast, radio, television interview. But before we dive into it, today's exciting interview, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Books to Life Marketing, the team who's making this all possible. They specialize in helping authors bring their stories to life through expert publishing, marketing, and media exposure. They're behind some of the most inspiring authors' journeys we've seen. And if you're an author looking to elevate your book, check out Books to Life Marketing is the partner you want in your corner. And I'm excited to welcome to the Neil Haley Show, Jerry Mitchell, someone who never imagined he'd become an author, but always chased adventure hands-on. Growing up on a farm near the ocean, Jerry learned life's biggest lessons working with animals and exploring nature, from guiding horses in the mountains to unraveling biblical mysteries through his podcast and teachings. Jerry proves that the greatest adventures often surprise us. Let's welcome Jerry Mitchell to the program. Jerry, thanks for stopping by. You're the author of Tradition to Truth. I appreciate you coming on the show.
I appreciate you having me.
It's kind of like you jump into this. You've mentioned adventure always called your name. What made you realize the Bible could offer the greatest adventures, Jerry?
Oh, wow. What could be more adventurous? People read the Bible and they think it's just full of boring details and boring this. It's not. The Bible in itself is a great adventure book. And when you actually begin to dive into it and study the language, the culture, and the history, it gives us the context we need to understand more and on a deeper level. So the adventure is in being able to peel apart the various components of it to see what fits where and why it fits. And quite honestly, how it doesn't fit with many of our traditions and many of our denominational doctrines.
And it's something that definitely gives a lot of life lessons. And I think that's the important part of one of the things that keeps you hooked when you start reading the Bible, is that the stories will relate to your life today, even though it's how many years ago, right? And you constantly look at these things and say, hey, my life kind of went that route because of decisions I made compared to that person in the Bible made, right?
Right.
Absolutely. How did growing up on a farm near the ocean shape your perspective on life and faith?
You know, we the area I grew up in was basically a resort area. So we had this influx of tourists all summer long. But at the same time, being on the farm, we were very well grounded. We would sell produce and eggs and that kind of thing. So people were always stopping by. Many, many different pastors would stop by for different things. And you got to know these people. You got to talk to them. And I was fortunate enough to be able to ask the right questions to, and I could tell when I was asking a question, they didn't want to answer. So, but being on a farm, I don't think it matters if you're at the ocean. I don't think it matters if you're in the Great Plains. There's something about spending your time out in nature every day, getting out and being in the sunshine, being in it, it just gives you a completely different perspective on life. And I was fortunate enough to be able to have that through my entire career.
And when you wake up and you enjoy where you're living and you kind of get in that peace outside, Jerry,
Mm-hmm.
it transforms you. Like I had to have my fiance Vanessa tell me, "Hey, what are you doing staying inside in an office with all four walls when you have all the freedom in the world? Where you can
Mm-hmm.
be upstairs, you can be working anywhere, yet you are downstairs in the studio with no windows. The new office I'm in has windows in my home office. And you're away from everything, no oxygen. And then you finally go out for a second after that time. And you feel this kind of movement and this kind of peace, inner
Mm-hmm.
peace when you walk around in silence or you do things that are not the intellectual side of things, but you're letting the peace and everything feel when you're outside, right?
Right. My wife asked me a couple weeks ago, where do you want to go on vacation? And I looked there and like, why would I go anywhere? We finally have, I mean, we've been married for 30 some years and we finally have exactly what we want pretty much and where I want to be. So why would I want to go anywhere? I've got everything I want right here.
Exactly. And that's the key. You got to build your sanctuary wherever you're
Yeah.
at. And how did you learn that? Who taught you that? That's a great life lesson in so many ways.
Actually, one of the fellows that I used to work for, he owned a huge cattle ranch out in Colorado. And, you know, one of his philosophies was, I love my horses, I love my cattle. Why would I want to do anything else? And that to me just spoke volumes. He knew what he enjoyed and he knew where he wanted to be. And it just spoke volumes to me. And I thought one of these days I'm going to have that. And it took a while and it took a lot of work. It did took a lot of sacrifices, but we made it.
And it felt great. And that's the thing, because there is sacrifice in life to get to where you want to be. So you have a place
Absolutely.
that you can go out. It's not going to be handed to you. Right, Jerry?
No, no, it's not going to be handed to you. Genesis, God tells Adam, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. Nothing's going to be given to you anymore. You have to earn it. You have to work for it. You have to pay for it. And that is one of the things that we learn from that lesson is nothing is free.
Can you recall one particular impactful lesson you learned from working with animals that helped you understand human behavior better?
Oh wow, there's a lot. With large animals, you know, basically you need to just kind of slow down, work them the way they want to be worked. You deal with them on their level. Um, and when you do that, it's a lot easier to accomplish what you need to accomplish. Um, Small animals, my family kept bees for years and years and years. You get in a hurry with bees, you will get the point. So slow down and be easy because you'll get stung.
Definitely will. And
Yep.
because and you see this with animals, and that's just very interesting. So observing animals can teach you some life lessons, it sounds like. What life
Oh,
lesson
yes.
would you want? Give me a particular animal and what life lesson it gave you.
I had a very, very good horse many years ago. And this horse was one of the kind that only come around once in a lifetime. And I was fortunate enough to have it. This this horse was smart, and I don't know why. Everything in the breeding said that he was going to be useless, but you could put a 6 month old baby on top of him and he would never take a bad step. But if you knew how to ride and you got on his back, you better be holding on because he's going to give you a ride. He's going to get the job done. That lesson right there is if you train them properly, and I can't stress that enough, if you train them properly, they're going to take care of you. And that is an important lesson.
Yeah. And that's interesting that so what how would that relate to humans then?
I don't think this is going to sound terrible. I don't think we're training humans properly. And I know that
I
sounds
think
weird.
that the word education as a teacher. So I'm a former teacher, Jerry, and I taught in the classroom for X amount of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking to go back and bring back my tutoring business after years. After COVID kind of shut it down, and now we're
Mm-hmm.
relaunching it with some AI tutoring program, working with a celebrity out in Hollywood. And what I've learned in this way is that we don't see the value of what an educator can do for a child, what a parent can do for a child, and how our selfishness, either the teacher's selfishness or the parent's selfishness, can lead to that kid not developing and growing. And
Right.
that, I think, when you said train, there goes the story of train in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Education is training. You
Mm-hmm.
know, look at, the Greek philosophers. They had a certain way that they trained and developed people. The same types of training as when we're training, algorithms today.
Right.
So, looking at all those things, we need to shape ourselves and almost train our own selves in this experience. What you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, and then we're going to be treating ourselves right because we trained ourselves right.
Right. Absolutely. A lot of people think, oh, if I have this education, I'm going to be smart. No, receiving an education means you have the information that you need to make good decisions. What makes you smart is knowing the difference between a good decision and a bad decision.
So, Jerry, you didn't pursue traditional education. How did learning through hands-on experience influence your approach to studying the Bible?
I was fortunate. I always figured if I could take something apart and put it back together, I knew how it worked. And that's why I looked at the Bible and I call it biblical forensics. A lot of times people will take a philosophical approach to the Bible, which is fine. I take a more forensic or mechanical approach. And the majority of the time, if the philosophers are honest, they're going to agree with what I see and what I say. Sometimes, sometimes we don't always agree, but typically it's because of a misunderstanding somewhere in some word or some phrase or something minor. But I always thought if I could take it apart, put it together, it's no different. A literary work is no different than an engine. It's no different than anything else. You should be able to take it apart and put it back together. And that's kind of what I did.
You talk about solving mysteries and puzzles in the scripture. Could you share one Bible mystery you found particularly fascinating?
One of the questions that is so often asked by many, 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 many people, and that is how do you get 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Easter Sunday morning? And you can't, there's no way to do it. It's just impossible. Jesus said, you get one sign, the sign of the prophet Jonah. As Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man must be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And I looked at that and I'm studying and studying, and I'm like, there's an answer. I just don't know where it is. And I kind of put it on the back shelf for a bit. And believe it or not, the answer's in Daniel. And I'm reading this and I'm like, this is impossible. Because in Daniel, it says that there will be someone who causes the uh, sacrifices and the oblations to cease, and he will be cut off in the midst of the week, but not for himself. Well, the midst of the week is what we consider Wednesday. And I looked at that and I'm like, is it possible? Could it be possible? And that was my first clue. And I looked at that and I'm like, yeah, it is possible, because if you put the crucifixion on a Wednesday instead of on a Friday, you get the resurrection just before sundown, Saturday night, which fits perfectly with John's narrative of Mary going to the tomb. While early on the first day, well, the Hebrew reckoning of time begins at sundown. Early on the first day for them would have been just after sundown. It was still dark. She gets there, and there it is. Now, there are some other clues in some very obscure places, like the early church father writings. I can't remember which one it is now. It might have been Tertullian, but it's one of them, where they make uh, a statement that basically says the crucifixion was in the middle of the week. So, until about the third century, everybody knew it wasn't hidden. It wasn't anything that uh, was some mystery. The mystery came much later once we got hold of it and changed things around. And I know Constantine takes a huge beating on this, but he wasn't by himself. There was Eusebius, there was the Roman Church, all of these things as they did everything they could to push Judaism out of Christianity. Unfortunately, what they wound up doing was creating a hybrid religion of part Judaism, part Christianity, and part pagan sun god worship. So you have this hybrid now that we're stuck with. And we don't understand, we can't figure out why certain things don't fit. Well, they don't fit because we're not reading the Bible. We're trying to read into the Bible instead of letting the Bible read into us.
Was there a moment you first felt compelled to teach others biblical insights?
Um, I never considered myself, an author. I never considered myself a teacher. I just tell people what I find. Um, and apparently I do pretty good at it. I have a way of explaining things very simply, which is what Tradition to Truth does. There was nothing like it. Most of the books that are critical text, they've got all the apparatus in them, they've got all the other things in them, and it takes you sometimes weeks to get through all of those comparisons. And what I was looking to do was put something together that was very simple, very easy to understand, very entry level, and say, you know what, think about these things, and hopefully you'll say, well, okay, I can see where you're going with this, but my real goal is I'd like people to say, no, 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 I'm going to prove you wrong. Well, prove me wrong, but do it the same way I did it. Prove me wrong, but you're not allowed to use church doctrine. You're not allowed to use tradition. You have to use scripture, plain and simple. So prove me wrong. And if you do that, you're going to be digging in the Bible. And that's my ultimate goal.
So tell me what inspired you to start your podcast and what has been the most rewarding part of that experience?
I was actually studying with a group of Orthodox rabbis. And I made the comment one day, well, if people would just live the way they're designed to live for 90 days, they'd see, how much their life would improve, and they just keep doing it. One of them looked at me, he says, that's really good. You need to write that up. Like, what are you talking about? It's just an idea. He's like, no, that's really good. Well, for the next few weeks, he was hounding me and hounding me. So I finally put something together. And that's how Give God 90 was. That's how it came about. Short story. So from there, we built the website. Everything on there is free. You make little changes every day so that you can improve your life, change your life for the better, hopefully. And a lot of people have. I've gotten some very, very good responses from it. Years ago, I had several soldiers with PTSD say this was immensely helpful. So I'm happy for that, happy for them. But the podcast, I never expected to do it. I really didn't. But we actually started out doing Facebook Live. I just put something out there once a week. And a friend of mine said, this is too good not to be available on other platforms. So we started the podcast, I think 6 years ago or so, and we're almost to 700 episodes.
Wonderful.
So we do
Yeah.
we do about two a week, and I'm starting to branch out more into video for YouTube. I don't know, people like video for some reason, even though most of them just click on it and they'll set it, they'll set their phone down and listen to it. But that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, I did not expect it to this to go this way. I really didn't.
And you see, once you do a podcast and once you have that voice to get to teach on any
Mhm.
platform, it inspires you to continue to do it. You said, okay, what you learned to prepare yourself for that podcast, what you learned in teaching this to all of your fans and followers, it really helps you understand you more.
Yeah, yeah, it does. One of the things with podcasts is we get the weekly statistics, and I look at them and kind of smile because I know they're not right. I've got pictures of people in Uganda who, they're sitting around listening while somebody's translating, and there's like 20 or 25 people on this table. And I'm like, well, that's really cool. And I have spoken to groups in Pakistan, in India, and it's been amazing. It really has.
It sounds like it. It's just like once you're hooked to do something that's creative. I was on another podcast. I was interviewing another person on my show, and we talked about creativity. Creativity kind of give when you're learning, you're a lifelong learner, and you're creative, and you try new things and do new things. There's
Mhm.
something that inspires you each day to get up every morning. Because guess
Right.
what? If you don't have a purpose, and I remember reading The Purpose Driven Life, and that was the first time I really saw a purpose I had in my life. After accomplishing certain things in my career, I read that book and then I really saw what purpose was. That's the key. If you don't
Mhm.
have purpose to get up every morning, you're not living.
No, you're not. You how many people shortly after they retire from a job, they have a heart attack and pass away. They play golf for a few days and then they're bored. And I know a lot of people who went back to work specifically because they're like, I hate sitting around. I didn't realize, retirement was boring. I don't know
And
how they can figure retirement's boring. I'm supposed to be semi-retired and I'm busier now than I've ever been.
there's a lot to do. So tell me about your books that are out so people that can go check out your books. I want to know about them.
Okay, well, Tradition to Truth is very entry level, very simple, very easy to read. There were people who wanted more. They wanted more detail, more depth. So God's Universe, God's Rules came out, and it deals a lot more with biblical authority and how we should be holding man's ideas and comparing that to the Bible instead of comparing the Bible to man's ideas. Because, let's face it, if you believe God, why would you challenge, what he said to what you think? That just kind of makes sense to me. Um, and Inheriting Lies is the most in-depth book like it that I know of. I when I finished it, I said this book needs to be on the desk of every seminary and Bible college student in the world because it answers questions that if you're in the religious world and you're a leader in a religious world, somebody's going to ask you these questions, and you've got to be ready with an honest answer. You know, People today, we're not satisfied with the typical the typical offhand answer. I remember being a kid in Sunday school and asking the question, do all angels have wings? And the Sunday school teacher looked at me and she goes, well, of course they do. Don't be ridiculous. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know, but I think the answer is in the Bible. So we need to give people honest answers, especially when it comes to biblical things, because in my opinion, doesn't mean it has to be anybody else's. The Bible is far too important not to offer people the best honest answer we can provide.
That's key. Because if you don't provide that honest answer, and that's where you get it and say, okay. And life lessons, we all
Mhm.
have our lessons to learn, and life is all about lessons and growing. And Jerry, I think that's why you're here. And that's why we're best place people can check out your podcast, first of all.
Podcast is available. There's a player on the givegod90.com page. It's also available. My YouTube channel, I don't know the name of it. Just search Jerry Mitchell Give God 90. It should come up. But it's also on Apple, iHeartRadio, you name it, it's out there. You can find the podcast anywhere.
And that's the thing. And you imagine where people can listen to it. And that's a great thing when you're out in the community, right? Say, here's my podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and share it. And that's people love that audio format. You're right. You
Mhm.
talked about video, but I sometimes think the video numbers are off and the audio numbers are off too in different
Yes.
directions. You see a lot
Yes.
more up for video because I listen to I never listen to podcasts on video. I go literally go to Apple, what's on my next on my list, listen to a different podcast, same thing with Spotify. I want to be able to be
Mhm.
doing something else because I grew up in the days of radio, as you did too.
Right.
And I don't want radio to die. And I think that podcasting is like the fireside chat. And it's a great way to choose the material you listen to versus be forced to what was on radio. And
Right.
that's the power we have. We have choice. There wasn't a lot of choices back in the day for sure. And your books are available on Amazon and your website.
Available at Amazon. They're available at authorjerrymitchell.com as well. So, and there is a link to them on the givegod90.com page.
So Jerry, what do you want to tell our listeners and viewers the final like tip for today?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're sitting, I know a lot of people that sit in churches and they say, well, what I'm hearing is not what I'm reading. I don't know what's going on, but pastor must know because he's been to school. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Question if you read something in the Bible and your pastor is saying something that you think conflicts with it, ask the question, at the proper time, right? You're not going to stand up in the middle of a church service and say, wait a minute, although I've wanted to do that a few times. um, but it's okay to ask questions. You have my permission. Okay. I will give everybody, my permission to ask questions. It's okay. Because if you don't ask, you're never going to get the answer.
All right. That's a great point. We don't ask questions. Well, thanks again, Jerry, for being on, and I appreciate it. And thanks again to Books to Life Marketing.